Cybernetic Revolutionaries by Medina. Preface. I like to think that I came upon the history of Project Cybersyn, the 1970s Chilean computer network for economic management, because I was looking in the right place, and because it was a place that few in the history of technology had visited. I was a doctoral student at MIT, and I wanted to learn more about the history of computing in Latin America, the region of my birth. MIT has some of the best holdings in the country on the history of computing, but it soon became clear that the material on Latin American computing was rather sparse. While I was digging in the stacks, bits and pieces of the story of Project Cybersyn caught my attention. There wasn't much there, 2 paragraphs and a footnote in one book. The book described the project using such phrases as cybernetic policy, decentralized computer scheme, and telex network operating in real time, and linked it to a British cybernetician I had never heard of, Stafford Beer. This system was built in Chile and brought together in one project political leaders, trade unionists, and technicians. Perhaps because I was reading about this curious cybernetic project while standing in one of the institutional birthplaces of cybernetics, the project took on special significance. Or maybe the story struck a chord because it so clearly brought together the social, political, and technological aspects of computing, and did so in a Latin American setting. Whatever the reason, I was hooked and felt compelled to learn more about this curious system. Over the next 10 years, the 2 paragraphs and a footnote that I stumbled across evolved into this book on the history of Project Cybersyn. The book began as an attempt to understand how countries outside the geographic, economic, and political centers of the world used computers. I was particularly interested in how Latin American experiences with computer technology differed from the well-known computer histories set in the United States, a difference I address in the pages that follow. The absence of Latin America specifically, and other areas of the Global South more generally, is also apparent in the history of technology, although it seems that this is slowly beginning to change. But as I was writing this book, it gradually became clear that what I was writing was an empirical study of the complex relationship of technology and politics, and the story of how a government used technology in innovative ways to advance the goals of its political project. However, it was not just any political project. In 1970, Chile began an ambitious effort to bring about socialist change through peaceful democratic means. It built on the reform efforts of the previous Chilean president, the Christian Democrat Eduardo Frei Montalva, 1964 to 1970, who had tried to lessen social and economic inequality in Chile through increased foreign investment, import substitution, industrialization, agrarian reform, and greater government ownership of Chile's copper mines. When the socialist Salvador Allende became Chile's president in November 1970, he accelerated many of these changes and made them more profound. For example, he called for the government to bring the most important national industries under state control and developed policies to redistribute national wealth. He also stressed that socialist change would occur within the bounds of Chile's existing democratic institutions. Nor was Project Cybersyn just any technological system. It was conceived as a real-time control system capable of collecting economic data throughout the nation, transmitting it to the government, and combining it in ways that could assist government decision-making. This was at a time when the US ARPANET, the predecessor of the Internet, was still in its infancy, and the most technologically advanced nations of the developed world were trying to build large-scale real-time control systems. In fact, the Soviet Union had already tried and failed to build a national computer system for managing a planned economy. By 1970, Chile had approximately 50 computers installed in the government and the private sector, most of which were out of date, whereas approximately 48,000 general-purpose computers were installed in the United States at the same time. However, those involved in Project Cybersyn believed that cybernetics, the interdisciplinary post-war science of communication and control would allow them to create a cutting-edge system that used Chile's existing technological resources. This book seeks to explain how technology and politics came together in a Latin American context during a moment of structural change, and why those involved in the creation of Project Cybersyn looked to computer and communications technologies as central to the making of such changes. To tell this story, I have relied upon a diverse range of source materials, including design drawings, newspaper articles, photographs, computer printouts, folk song lyrics, government publications, archived correspondence, and technical reports that I have amassed from repositories in the United States, Britain, and Chile. I have made extensive use of the documents housed at the Stafford Beer Collection at Liverpool John Moores University in England, which holds 16 boxes of papers relating to Beer's work in Chile. This history also benefited from the personal archives of project participants Guy Bonsiepe, Roberto Cañete, Raul Espejo, and Stafford Beer. How these documents survived is a story in its own right, and it shows that those involved with the project viewed it as a special accomplishment. I present part of that story in the pages that follow. In addition, I used documents from a number of Chilean government agencies, including the State Development Corporation, the State Technology Institute, and the now-defunct National Computer Corporation, the Library of the United Nations Economic Commission on Latin America in Santiago, the archives of the Catholic University of Chile, and the institutional holdings of IBM Chile. The rich holdings of the National Library in Santiago and the libraries at the University of Chile, the Catholic University of Chile, and the University of Santiago allowed me to supplement these primary resources with press accounts, other archived materials, and relevant secondary sources. A full list of consulted repositories appears in the bibliography. I conducted more than 50 interviews in Chile, Argentina, Mexico, the United States, Canada, England, Portugal, and Germany between 2001 and 2010. Interview subjects included Cybersyn project participants, high-ranking members of the Allende and Frei governments, early members of the Chilean computer community, managers in Chilean factories, and members of the Chilean cybernetics community, among others. Some interviews lasted 30 minutes, while others spanned 2 days. Some took place by means of extended email correspondence. Unless otherwise noted, I have translated to English all the passages excerpted from Spanish-language interviews and written sources. Only a small number of the people interviewed for this project actually appear in the book, but all the conversations I had shaped my interpretation of this history. I had difficulty locating workers who remembered Project Cybersyn because, as I will explain later, so few factory workers were involved in the project. Nor did the project dovetail with the simultaneous worker participation efforts that were taking place on the shop floor of Chile's factories. However, I did talk to a number of workers at the National Labour Federation and at the Chilean factory Marico, which formed part of Project Cybersyn. I also advertised in a popular leftist newspaper that I was looking for workers who remembered the project. Not a single worker responded to this advertisement, although it did put me in touch with several government technologists who also remembered working on Cybersyn. That the project is remembered by technologists, not factory workers, is historically significant, as I discuss. Therefore, this is not a history from below in the traditional sense. However, it also would be inaccurate to say this is a history told from above. Scientists, engineers, designers, and technologists are the main protagonists of this story. And while many of them worked for the Chilean government, they were not politicians, nor were they, with one exception, members of the government elite. This book shares a goal with more traditional histories from below, in that it aims to add new voices and experiences previously absent to the historical literature. All source materials, including oral histories, have their ingrained subjectivity and must be read with a critical eye. the reader should bear in mind that in some cases the memories presented in the pages that follow have been shaped by the post-coup experiences of the interviewees, and some participants use the interview process as a way to revisit and come to terms with one of the most contentious periods of the Chilean past. Project Cybersyn also received substantial media attention while I was conducting this research, in part because my research was becoming public as the 30-year anniversary of Allende's death approached. Although I do not believe any of my subsequent interviewees were less than frank, I do believe that press coverage of Project Cybersyn influenced some of my later interviews, either by making people more willing to meet with me or by making them more aware of their public image. Thus, the memories that people related to me cannot be viewed as objective accounts of what happened, but when juxtaposed with one another, can represent a confluence of many histories, a diffraction of voices, some overlapping and some not. These oral narratives have enriched the telling of this history, and material taken from my transcripts is documented as such. In general, I place greater weight on archival documents than on personal testimonies. This book began as an attempt to learn more about computing in Latin America, but it ended up being about much more. While I did not stick to my original research question of trying to understand how nations outside the political and economic centres of the world use computers, my hope is that the history presented in this book will illustrate the value of asking such questions. Acknowledgements. In 1971, the British cybernetician Stafford Beer travelled to Santiago, Chile, for the first time to explore how cybernetics and technology could be used to further a project for structural and political change. The experience changed his life. 30 years later, I followed Beer's footsteps to Chile, hoping to learn more about how cybernetics, computation, and politics came together in Chilean history. My journey, like Beer's, also proved transformative. It resulted not only in this book, but also in numerous friendships, intellectual ties, institutional connections, and extended family. It is now a pleasure to look back and thank those who made this book possible. Like Project Cybersyn, this book represents the collective effort of many dedicated individuals. Peter Wynne and David Mindell offered critical guidance throughout the research and writing process, and read multiple drafts of this work. This book has profited from their expertise and generosity. In addition, the following individuals read early excerpts of this manuscript and provided comments: Leslie Jo Fraser, Emily Maguire, Lucy Suchman, Slava Gurevich, David Hacken, Selma Shabanovich, Kalpana Shankar, Tom Gurin, Eric Stolterman, Deborah Cohen, David Houndshaw, Ronald Klein, Thomas Misa, Matt Francisco, Heather Weltzer, Ben Peters, and the anonymous reviewers from the MIT Press. This work would not have been possible without support from the National Science Foundation in the form of Scholars Award 0724104 and Dissertation Improvement Award 0322278. The School of Informatics and Computing at Indiana University Bloomington provided an interdisciplinary environment that introduced me to new bodies of literature and shaped my thinking during the writing process. I thank Bobby Snabel, Michael Dunn, Marty Siegel, and Filippo Mensa for supporting this work at different moments with school resources. The Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, the Office for the Vice Provost of Research, and the Office of the Vice President for International Affairs at Indiana University also deserve mention for supporting this project at critical moments, as do the Charles Babbage Institute, the Social Science Research Council, and the American Council for Learned Societies. I was fortunate to receive intellectual and financial support from the MIT program in Science, Technology and Society and the Dibner Institute for the History of Science and Technology. Individuals at both institutions shaped the intellectual development of this work and its author in ways too numerous to list. The following individuals also deserve special mention. In alphabetical order: Mariela Arradona, Bill Asprey, Eric Carbajal, Claude Clegg, Michelle Domka, Carla Fernandez, Bernard Jocheran, Dennis Groth, Hugh Gustafson, Doug Haynes, Stephen Kovacs, Bruno Latour, Elena Leonard, Marta Maldonado, Konstantin Malik, Francisca Manchilla, Mera Margolis, Marco Medina, Mauricio Medina, Pedro Medina, Rosa Moscoso, Jennifer Nicholson, Catalina Ossa, Hugo Palmarola, Angel Pereira, Alejandro Perez, Andrew Pickering, Cecilia Riveros, Enrique Rivera, Luis Rocha, Alfio Seta, Maria Jose Snoida, Daniela Torres, Peter Verbal, and David Whittaker. Alfredo Reran arranged for me to have a visiting position in the political science department at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. Raul Orion and Pablo Sierra similarly arranged for me to have a visiting position in the industrial engineering department of the Universidad de Chile, and generously provided an internet connection and office space. Christian Medina drew the map of Chile that appears in this book. This book has further profited from the editing talents of Polly Kommel and the indexing talents of Janet Perlman and the attentions of Marguerite Avery, Matthew Abate, Erin Housley, Susan Clark, Katie Parsons, Paula Woolley, and the staff at the MIT Press. Early research for the book appeared in my article Designing Freedom, Regulating a Nation, Socialist Cybernetics in Allende's Chile, Journal of Latin American Studies 38, No. 3, 2006, 571-606. I thank Cambridge University Press for allowing the republication of excerpts from that earlier text. To the individuals who generously opened their homes, trusted me to document their experiences, or took a risk by giving me access to their web of connections, I thank you. It is difficult to do justice to the lifetimes of accomplishments that now reside on my interview tapes and computer hard drive. I hope this text is worthy of the confidence these individuals have shown in its author. Raúl Espejo, Guy Bonsepe, Roberto Cognete, Italo Bozzi, Elena Leonard, and the late Stafford Beer provided primary source documents and photos from their personal archives that enrich my telling of this history. Finally, this book would not have been written were it not for the support of my family. My parents, Mary Ann and Robert Miller, have provided a lifetime of encouragement and unconditional love. Their supportive words and babysitting services made it possible for me to bring this project to a conclusion. My son, Gail, entered my life in the midst of the research and writing process. I thank him for lightening my day with dimpled smiles and easy laughter, and for sharing his mother with this book, a rival sibling. I dedicate this book to my husband, Christian, for teaching me to love his homeland, and for making it possible for me to write one small part of its history. Prologue. One day this will make quite a story. Stafford Beer, 3rd of August 1972. On the 30th of December 1972, Chilean President Salvador Allende visited a futuristic operations room that seemed more like a set for a Stanley Kubrick film than a command center for a South American government in the midst of economic war. The hexagonal room reflected the aesthetic of 1970s modernity. In it, 7 white fiberglass swivel chairs with orange cushions sat atop a brown carpet. Wood paneling covered the floors. On one wall, a series of screens displayed economic data from the nation's factories. A simple control mechanism consisting of 10 buttons on the armrest of each chair allowed occupants to bring up different charts, graphs, and photographs of Chilean industrial production and display them on the screens. On another wall, a display with flashing red lights indicated current economic emergencies in need of attention. The faster the flashes, the more dire the situation. A third wall displayed an illuminated colour image of a 5-tiered cybernetic model based on the human nervous system. This abstract model, seemingly out of place in a space for emergency decision-making, was there to remind occupants of the cybernetic ideas that had guided the construction of the control room. Cybernetics, the post-war science of communication and control, looked for commonalities in biological, mechanical, and social systems. The room formed part of a larger system designed to help the economy adapt quickly to changes in the national environment. The operations room was created to help Allende implement his vision of socialist change. Its creators had expected that high-ranking members of the government would use the room to make rapid decisions based on current data and a macroscopic view of national economic activity. Eventually, the technologists hoped, the government would construct similar rooms in each government ministry and the presidential palace. The president sat in one of the futuristic orange and white swivel chairs and pushed the buttons on the armrest. He expected the data displayed on the screens would change, and that he would see how using such a room could help him manage an economy in crisis. 2 months earlier, a national strike had threatened to end his presidency. In less than 10 months, he would be overthrown in a violent military coup that would end Chilean democracy and his life. But at this moment, the president was still struggling to stay in power. Allende probably was hoping to see a new form of socialist modernity that could help his government survive. But the heat of the South American summer had raised the temperature of the electronics in the room beyond their tolerance. Once activated, the projectors promptly brought up economic graphs and charts, but they were not the graphs and charts that had been requested. The president told his engineers to keep working, and they did, until the end. Both the operations room and the Chilean road to socialism were utopian dreams of a new form of governance, but neither materialized in the way its designers imagined.